call this session of the Board of Commissioners for Benton County to order at 9:02 a.m. on March 5th. I will start with introductions. I'm Zan Ojero, Board Chair.
Nancy Wise, Commissioner.
Pat Malone, Commissioner.
Rachel McEnany, County Administrator.
Vance Groney, County Council.
And in the room, we often also do introductions. So, sir, if you'd like to start.
Yes, sir.
And just go ahead and introduce yourself. We'll do a round of introductions through the room.
I'm Dan Shapel. My wife Nancy is coming in a moment here. I'm we're the co-owners of Cargill Hill Cellars, located in Cargill Hill Drive. 24 years in operation.
Thank you. And next.
My name is Robert Orton. I'm a mechanic for Republic Services at Cobham Butte Landfill. I'm here to put forth concerns about what's taking place out there to the commissioners.
We will call you up, both of you, shortly. Next.
Brian Lee, Emergency Manager for Benton County.
Okay, thank you. And online?
Jeff Van Arsdal, Benton County Sheriff.
Okay. Anyone else online like to introduce themselves before we move on?
Gabby Dibble, Benton County Finance.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, we have announcements, and the first announcement is that while we typically live stream on Facebook Live, we're not doing so this morning because Facebook is nationally, or probably internationally, facing some instability. So we have shifted our live stream to YouTube, just for the record. And in future, we will probably shift most of our live stream to YouTube because it is more accessible to more people. Next up is review and approval of the agenda. We do have a significant change. We're striking item 8.1 under old business, which is consideration of the revised disposal site advisory committee bylaws. The reason for that change, it was an error in the packet pointed out by community member Mark Yeager, that the bylaws, the red line version in the packet was a red line contrasting the proposed bylaws with an intermediate revision and not with the original approved current existing bylaws. So just for the sake of clarity and legality, we need to have a red line version that compares the original bylaws to the current proposed bylaws, despite that intermediate step. Therefore, we will take that matter up on March 19th at our next regular board meeting. Are there any other changes or additions to the agenda?
No, not right now. And we're sorry for any inconvenience for those who traveled in today for that issue.
Yeah, we will still, of course, welcome public comment. And the public comment sheet is up here. If anyone that has arrived late would like to sign up, please come and do so. Okay, I do have one more, just a small addition to the agenda, and that is under other, we will take up the question of a sponsorship for a local community-based organization fundraiser and that will be under item 9, other. Okay. Moving on, the first, next item of business is proclamations, and then we'll go into comments from the public. So this month, we are commemorating International Women's History Month, excuse me. And this is proclamation number P2024-003. Women's History Month is a celebration of the invaluable contributions made by women to American history, culture, and society. President Carter was the first to proclaim National Women's History Week in 1980, celebrated the week of March 8th in order to correspond with International Women's Day. Women's History Month was designated by Congress in 1987 and has been observed annually throughout the month of March in the United States, serving as a time for recognition, reflection, and appreciation. Recognizing the achievements of women in all facets of life, science, community, government, literature, art, sports, medicine, has a huge impact on the development of self-respect and new opportunities for girls and young women. We seek to elevate positive role models for women by highlighting the stories of our foremothers, the challenges they faced, and the accomplishments that they've achieved. The theme designated by the National Women's History Alliance for the 2024 observation is Women Who Advocate for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Women play a pivotal role in promoting fairness, embracing diversity, and fostering inclusivity in our communities and institutions. Many feel the critical need to speak up and work harder for fairness in our institutions, economy, and social interactions. We celebrate women who lead by example through their commitment to embrace everyone and exclude no one in our common quest for freedom and opportunity. Locally, we celebrate the accomplishments and leadership of historical figures such as Letitia Carson and Governor Barbara Roberts, our own Annabelle Jaramillo, former commissioner, and the first woman of color president of Oregon State University, Dr. Jayathy Murthy. Therefore, be it proclaimed March 2024 as Women's History Month. Let us take this opportunity to celebrate the remarkable contributions of women throughout history and to reaffirm our commitment to achieving gender equality, diversity, and inclusion in all aspects of our society. I would entertain a motion to approve the proclamation.
I move to proclaim March 2024. Sorry, we're getting some feedback.
Second that.
Hello. Hello. I move to proclaim March 2024 as Women's History Month proclamation number P 2024-003.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, please indicate with an aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And we will move on to our public comment. And we're going to start this morning with Dan and Nancy Chapel. And if you'd please come up to the table. Good morning. And you need to push the button on those microphones and the light will turn red. Yeah, you had it right. Just push that button and it will be on. And you have 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
And there
Thank you
is
very
a
much.
Timer over here on this table if you need to take a look.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. Nancy and I are owners of Cardwell Hill Cellars, a 8,000 case a day case a year winery in Philomath. We have 7 permanent employees that have been with us 10 years to 22 years, and several part-time employees. For some period of time, we've had food trucks to events at our facility, and recently we've been advised that we cannot have food trucks. Food service is favored by the OLCC. Regulations have been passed. Laws have been passed in the state of Oregon. It's had support from the Oregon Wine Board. The OLCC favors and almost insists that food is available during periods when people are drinking wine.
Could I interrupt for just a minute? The OLCC is the Oregon Liquor Control Commission.
So to continue here, a number of wineries are now affected by conditions here in Benton County, where we've recently been informed we cannot have food trucks in our facility. This is impacting the revenue of both us and the food truck owners. And it's a major imposition. Nancy, would you like to say anything else here?
I would. I have spoken with a Mr. James R. Wright, an associate planner in the Planning Commission, to voice my concern. He has assured me that if I wanted to use a review for authorization of approval for placement, it would cost me in excess of $1,000 to do so. That does not seem to be feasible. Secondly,
To wrap up here, we're going to address this issue with OLCC, with Corvallis, and the Chamber of Commerce, that we're being discriminated against. Food trucks are allowed within the city limits, but they're not allowed in the country.
quickly, one last comment. Senate Bill 841, which was promulgated in 2017, is in direct contradiction to this rule. And so I have brought this to the attention of Mr. Wright, and I'd like to bring it to your attention as well, because apparently this ruling is, as I have said previously, in direct contradiction to Senate Bill 841, and I have a copy of that if you'd like to see it. Thank
The
you.
law firm Stoll Reeves has a publication addressing this issue, and the entire issue was modified in 2017 with additional legislation proposing and authorizing the use of temporary food facilities in conjunction with wine tasting and wine events.
Thank you for bringing this issue to our attention, and we will definitely look into it further with our staff and then figure out where we go from here.
Thank you.
Much
We
appreciated.
feel this is very important so that Benton County is still considered a good place for the wine industry and for people enjoying the benefits of the wine industry.
Thank you. Can you tell me when this decision was made? How long have you been facing this challenge?
We were just notified within the last few weeks, as others have been notified. All of us used food trucks last year, and we're totally unaware that Benton County was taking such drastic measures.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Robert Orton.
Commissioners, my name is Robert Horton. I'm a mechanic for Republic Services at Coffin Butte Landfill. I'm here to again raise issues with you regarding the conditions out there, the environmental policy and safety violations that Republic Services practices every day. Last night, I emailed each of you a video of active gas leaks taking place on the working face of the landfill. And as I'm sure you're all aware, the EPA report that came out that was suppressed clearly shows negligence on the part of the company for what they're doing out there. What's taking place is putting the environment, the community, and your constituents in danger. It would be incumbent upon the commissioners being on the ground floor, being right up the road from this, to address these issues in a real and meaningful fashion. Do not accept the excuses given to you by Republic Services. Do not abdicate your responsibilities to the DEQ or the EPA, but to rise to this, represent the people who have elected you and address this issue. There's an expansion permitting coming up for this company. To not address these issues before approving the expansion is nothing short of negligence. And I have volumes of photos, videos, and audio recordings clearly demonstrating these things. I would be happy to provide them to you commissioners should you have the interest in addressing these issues. But again, Republic Services does not serve the community. Republic Services serves its shareholders. I would ask you to serve your community in this and address these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Susan Valenza.
Morning, thank you. Good morning. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. Let's see. County Commissioners, I know in the past, as you've run in the last election, you've all expressed your interest in safeguarding our environment and in being responsible to your constituents, the safety and well-being of your constituents. I'd like to talk a little bit today about the Coffin Butte landfill. This Coffin Butte landfill is an accidental landfill created after World War II for waste from Camp Adair. It now takes in 30% of Oregon's waste. And I'm sure this is wished to increase as the Riverbend landfill is no longer accepting waste. Coffin Butte is in a place where a landfill should not be. It's in a very wet part of a wet valley, and a wet climate in environs leads to accelerated decomposition, methane production, and toxic leaching. Methane, leachate, and groundwater contamination are issues that are of concern here and are likely to get worse with any future expansion. Lead, mercury, cadmium, PFAS, the forever chemical, and gasoline contaminated soils continue to arrive daily. Many neighbors of Coffin Butte continue to report noxious odors coming from the landfill. There's been the stench of toxic air, often this February. Many filed complaints with DEQ in past weeks. Some, I understand, were forwarded to commissioners. Has the EPA measured what hazardous air pollutants are in the air above the landfill? This can be done. It was done at Riverbend in McMinnville. Hazardous HAPs emitted by municipal solid waste landfills can include, but are not limited to, vinyl chloride, ethyl benzene, toluene, and benzene. All of the airborne toxic chemicals emitted from these landfills can cause adverse health effects provided sufficient exposure. And I could reference the Salem Statesman Journal article of 2023, where the measurements taken by EPA of methane were very different from those measured by Republic. So commissioners, I'd like to know, are you responsible to us or to Republic? One wonders, when I understand that tonight is to be discussed the consulting firm, I wonder what public input there was in how this consulting firm was chosen. There may be one or two. I know how important that can be in steering the process forward. I understand this consulting firm is one that has worked with Republic. The county has appointed Mr. Steve Chase, the SMMP committee task force chair, before there's an existing committee. Who is Mr. Chase? At the meeting of January 23rd, Commissioner Nichols introduced him as just a community volunteer. He relatively recently moved to the area, I assume,
You are over time. Can you please wrap up?
yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chase worked in Stockton when Ford Landfill sought to its expansion process for many years. And so the concern is somebody has been appointed that has a great deal of experience, while a consulting firm has been appointed that has a particular direction. Last statement I would say is, Commissioner Wise, you said at the January 23rd meeting that we are the stewards. Did you mean that we are the stewards for taking in 3% of the trash of Oregon? Or did you mean that you are the stewards for Benton County and the health and well-being of your constituents and of our environment? Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move on to our work session. Item 5.1. This is an ice storm after action report for January 2024 ice storm with Brian Lee, the emergency manager from the Sheriff's Office, and April Holland from Health Services.
Just the actual PowerPoint slide deck, please. Not that one. It's okay. Right. Good morning, commissioners. So I wanted to come forward to present to you, and I know some of you have seen pieces of this before, regarding the Benton County response to the ice storm back in January, from January 12th to the 17th. And throughout this presentation, we'll cover some key highlights and areas of particular interest and emphasis, not only the commission here, but as well as the public. And with me, of course, I brought April Holland to cover some more specific details related to the health department's emergency response. So we'll try to make this as comprehensive as possible. Just a very quick recap. This weather event started as a winter storm watch.
Brian, can you take just a quick break?
Yes. No problem.
Yeah, we've got the wrong presentation up still on the
Zoom side?
Zoom side. There we go. Now you can proceed.
Okay, so as I was saying, this weather event started as a initial winter storm watch and then quickly turned into a freezing rain warning. The cold temperatures were forecasted, which were unique for this incident. They were forecasted for several days, and this incident was actually multiple storms combined into one 6-day-long incident. We had ice accumulations around Benton County of 2 to 3 inches, depending on where you were. There were significant outages and cold weather-related impacts throughout the county, particularly in our rural areas. There were a lot of communication issues statewide and region-wide, as well as here in Benton County as well, with a lot of cell phone towers running out of generator fuel or having other connectivity-related issues. Transportation issues, of course, were widespread. Most folks were not able to drive, and even first responders had a lot of trouble traveling on the roads. And that also jammed up then our supply chain lines as well. The EOC, or Emergency Operations Center for Benton County, was activated at a level 1 level, which is a monitor status, and then later changed to level 2, or a partial activation, with just a handful of EOC team members responding. We conducted several coordination calls, as well as our Joint Information Center, or public information coordination, and then we were generating situation reports twice a day just to maintain updates on current information around the region. Statewide, currently, the impacts are over $75 million, which is very much a major incident. And right now it is sitting, I believe, with the president's office to seek a major disaster declaration. One thing I really wanted to highlight, down below, you see the community lifelines here that are outlined by FEMA. And if you look at these as comprehensive areas that keep our community healthy and functioning, as well as our local government healthy and functioning, what you notice is that every one of these, except for the hazardous material lifeline, were very severely impacted during this ice event. So I know normally right now we think Cascadia earthquakes, we think wildfire response, but this one is yet another example of the impacts that we're seeing of climate change on our local environment, as well as the severity of disasters. Just a quick snapshot of the damages and expenses here in Benton County. This number has gone up a little bit, but we're estimated at $1.82 million, and that is for overtime costs or direct damages to public infrastructure and facilities. So it does not include any other straight time or other costs not included, as we would say. Looking ahead at resources deployed, as always, our first responder teams were out working very consistently 24/7. That includes law enforcement, our fire EMS side, as well as public works. We're pretty consistently doing everything they could. And just to call attention to it, for folks who don't know, of course, the snow plows do not work on the sheets of ice. Water treatment plant operators are kind of the other unsung heroes behind the scenes. There were a lot of water treatment plant issues throughout the state, including here in Benton County. All of our water treatment plants got impacted to some degree or another, but were quickly restored or had backup systems in place that allowed them to function, and therefore we did not require any significant boil water notices. There were hundreds of utility crews and contract staff throughout the region working to restore power. So for most areas who lost power, they were restored pretty quickly compared to some other parts around the state. EMS, particularly through the Corvallis Fire Department, doubled their staffing to 6 units. This was just barely enough to survive this incident, and it was noted that if they had to go any longer, they would have been without staff as well. So again, very exhausting incident overall for our EMS crew as well as our hospitals. Our search and rescue transport actually is operated primarily by volunteers. It operated 24/7 coverage for critical staff, particularly medical providers to the hospital, as well as some assisted living facilities. And they did around 70 transports, and that included some in the middle of the night. So they were moving critical staff to and from the hospital and other medical facilities throughout the incident. I won't touch too much on this, but because it'll come up a little bit later, but Faith, Hope, and Charity contract that April Holland manages was operated and provided overflow sheltering to our community service providers. And they had around 60 guests on average every single night throughout this incident. The Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center, COI, Community Service Consortium, Unity Shelter, and others had staff and volunteers operating throughout this incident. It was extremely taxing on them, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit, but they did provide services to the unhoused community members throughout this incident. Our public information team was diligently posting and sharing information about the current status of roads, as well as just general response. Once we really got that coordinated and synced, we saw a huge success where there was a lot better public perception of what was happening and what was taking place. I already mentioned we had some EOC members activated primarily virtually. We had a call center team staged with some of our CERT volunteers. And then we had some mass care and shelter sites identified and also staged, which we'll touch on here in just a moment. A quick highlight of the county emergency management activities. This is more stuff behind the scenes. A lot of information coordination and communication with our departments, county administrator, as well as partner agencies. And that's mainly sharing what's going on out in our environment, what are we dealing with, what are the needs, and checking in on our partners. We shared a lot of situation reports and created what we call a common operating picture, just so we had a better understanding of what was happening statewide. We conducted the damage assessment process and data collection process. So immediately following an incident, you have a very short window to collect your initial damages to start having an understanding of what the impacts are. So those are direct impacts as well as dollar-related impacts. And we also had daily coordination with our regional partners and state as well. And it was very well received sharing that information within the community. I'll touch on it here and then I'll kind of defer to April here in a moment. But the health department also had public information going very, very ramped up through the health communications team. The street outreach and harm reduction team, we're doing a ton for sheltering and supporting the unhoused, particularly helping them move, giving them resources and services, transporting them around where needed. There was a lot of resource distribution and check-in from the FEP, or the Public Health Emergency Preparedness team, as well as the harm reduction team, again, just providing that direct client interaction and support to the community. We touched on the Faith Open Charity contract that was activated, that actually came in as a very important asset to support the unhoused, and particularly those individuals who met the criteria to have those services. There was a lot of information and communication coordination directly with providers. I was regularly communicating with April, who was in communicating to her team, and sharing communications throughout. And there was a lot of critical support just to clients across the board, and that includes some of the behavioral health or CHC-related clients who needed their medications. I think that's also an area of improvement. But again, this was a huge need, and we saw a lot of the health department employees stepping up regardless of time, pay, anything else, to make sure that their clients were taken care of. So that was a huge win. A couple near misses I want to call out, and this was heavily discussed, is daytime warming for the unhoused. With the county and city facilities being closed due to the lack of transportation and lack of staff being able to come in, that really strained our community service providers. We heard a lot about it. We've seen letters and emails, and we had some various meetings and discussions with them. And so this is one of our biggest areas of after action improvements that we would like to support. There was, again, that critical medications to behavioral health and CHC clients. Once again, this just threaded the needle on being able to support those populations. Had this event gone any longer, we would have needed a lot more coordinated effort to make sure those medications were getting around. There were some first responders still driving medications around to people, but again, it wasn't a really clean process to take in those requests and then coordinate it so it was effective. The hospital had a hard time, as we say, decompressing. So as they released people from the hospital, they were unable to quickly get them home because, again, people could not drive on the roads. Transportation was a big issue, and that strained the hospital system as well as the EMS system. Our access functional needs, or mass care and sheltering, if we needed to provide sheltering services for either vulnerable populations or just general population due to power outages or any other weather-related emergencies, we would probably not have been able to, or not been able to for very long. And so that was a major concern of ours moving forward. We're taking some measures right now to develop additional plans, agreements, and looking at resources to how we could possibly coordinate that in the future for an ice incident or a wildfire or other emergency. The rural support for warming centers was a concern that came up, particularly for Monroe, but some of our outlying areas that needed additional support, they don't have a lot of staff or volunteers available to them. And so they asked for support if we are to staff warming shelters. They had facilities, but they didn't have staff. Transportation for the access functional needs with Corvallis Transit, as well as the Benton area transit being closed. There was obviously limited transportation for those who are lower income or really rely on public transit, as well as our access functional needs population going to doctor's appointments and getting groceries. So that was another issue that we saw as a major concern. We're working with Benton area transit and Dial-A-Bus to figure out how this could be solved in the future. And then the other one here is a lot of personal vehicles were used for county business. There's inherent risk with that, but particularly if folks got into an accident, obviously there was additional liability associated with that. So again, all near misses. One thing I want to call out here is this picture was from Corvallis Fire Facebook page. That is all 6 ambulance units. So every ambulance that was on shift, waiting at the ER to offload patients. And the ER was very full the whole time as well. And this picture illustrates what happened on a regular basis. This was not just a one time during the incident. It happened at least 3 or 4 times every day. So a couple issues that came up. There was what we often put these into buckets in emergency management. One of them is operational coordination. So coordination between first responders, public works, and utilities. It was effective enough, we'll say, but it's not as coordinated as it could be. So one of the findings, which you could see as one of the exhibits, is to do a more coordinated briefing during these emergencies so that they're actually in sync. They know what each other are working on, their staffing levels, and they can support each other a little bit better. The other one was coordination of resources and requests. Resource requests would flow around between different agencies, between different individuals, and things are not as centralized and coordinated as we would like. So that was, again, another major area of improvement. Public information, we are already working on the road closures and conditions update. There was just a lack of update. And again, it was hard to update something other than that the roads are still extremely icy and hazardous. Please don't travel. But folks, the community members expressed concerns that they wanted more information. The other one was city and county closures and service impacts, just determining what that would look like internally and externally and impacts to the public, as well as our internal operations. So that was a big area of concern. And then resource availability and readiness. We have vehicles, we have personnel, we have transportation, but again, trying to make sure that's all inventoried, coordinated, and ready to respond is sort of a different area of discussion. And then our mass care and sheltering, again, going back to that daytime warming or support, expanded sheltering, we would need staff and we need additional resources to make that happen. And so all these can be really captured in various plans, but that's only one piece of the puzzle when it comes to operationalizing these. So just real quick on a couple of takeaways. We determined we would do daily coordination calls, continue the situation reports and data collection. So ideally through an electronic means or by calling people and getting the information. We figured out a new resource request process. One of those pieces is to stand up a health department operations center to help coordinate directly with our community service providers, as well as coordinate with the EOC or emergency management staff that stood up. We would possibly activate the EOC if needed. This was kind of one of those incidents that wasn't quite big enough to require a full activation and increase our incident command system processes. So that way things are cleaner or more cleanly documented and a little bit coordinated in a organized, meaningful fashion. And then we're going to really partake in some more robust planning activities, particularly focused on mass care and sheltering and transportation around ice storms specifically. Because again, during a wildfire incident, this would look quite different than dealing with an ice storm. For public information, we've already implemented some of these improvements. Public Works is working diligently to manage those road conditions and closures, particularly during after hours or on weekends. The city and county closure and service impacts, we're working with HR and thinking about an opt-in system so we can have a cleaner picture for our employees and staff, as well as communicating with the public. And then a model of continuity of operations. So this comes up a lot as a discussion point recently, but improving the county's continuity of operations plans with each department. We'll be going around to make sure that is in effect so everyone knows their role. So resource availability, again, we recently put out a survey to collect information on fleet resources, but we're going to start developing a resource list from each department. It's actually part of the continuity of operations planning, so we can do possible pre-staging and pre-incident outreach, and not only to our providers, but also to our other community partners, city managers, et cetera. And then figure out some sort of way to have fleet resources on hand and the training associated with it. So it's not enough to say we have a four-wheel drive vehicle available. We need to know if it has chains, who's able to drive it, where the keys are, the fueling procedures, on whether or not city and county can drive each other's vehicles. So there's a lot more discussions going on related to our resource availability, particularly related to ice storms. And then the last one here, the mass care and sheltering. A lot more additional planning, working with volunteers and employee coordination with COOP. So if we have services that are suspended, how could we reallocate some of those personnel to support sheltering? And again, when we say sheltering, we're talking about for just any population with training, with support, with resources. And then last is identifying our facilities and having some MOUs standing and ready to roll out when needed. There's been a couple discussions I want to highlight, and I'll kind of turn this over to April. We've had some discussions with our community service providers. Some things we really want to take away and dive into more are the roles and responsibilities, particularly with the city of Corvallis, public health, county emergency management, and then the cities in general, as well as our community service providers. We just need to very clearly outline what our roles and responsibilities are and where the gaps are so we can help support each other. We're gonna start doing pre-planning meetings again. We've done this a little bit, but maybe they've been a little isolated. So we want to make them a little more comprehensive. We have at least a summer and a winter. So going into fire season, hot weather, as well as clean air related preparations, and then going into the fall with flooding particularly, as well as this winter storm. So just kind of coordinate a little bit better. We'll be discussing some more preparedness tips and trainings and outreach and working with them directly to just share information and have some sort of pathway. So if they have resource needs or questions, they can direct those through a clean line. And then having, again, that continuity of operations discussion with them as well. So helping support them with some of their plans and some of their procedures, and just help address their areas that they ran into, particularly around staffing, and some of the challenges trying to maintain staffing for 6 days straight. We're going to work on that resource coordination piece we talked about, primarily through our health department operations center, but at least getting a lead point of contact for resource requests. And then facility access. We've already began discussions with the city of Corvallis, as well as some of our other city partners around the county regarding facility access during emergencies. And again, a lot of folks are very willing. It's just figuring out the staffing and some of the logistics of keys and what terms and conditions we would have to utilize those facilities. And then last one there is that staffing piece. It's really important that we have all these plans in place, but if we can't provide staff, volunteers, we can't mobilize people to actually do this, then we'll run into a lot more problems. So that was our biggest takeaway. April?
Thanks, Brian. So commissioners, I just want to provide a little more depth of data for the sheltering that happened, the overflow sheltering and the daytime warming that our community partners, our homeless service providers stood up as the city and county both were closed. So and then I'll get into some of the next steps to get follow-up from our provider community and others. So the activation for our severe weather overflow sheltering occurred for all 6 nights for the 12th through the 17th. The 17th didn't technically meet activation criteria, but County Administrator McEnany gave the go-ahead to allow that to occur. The information that Brian shared, Brian, I gave you some preliminary data before we had received the full data set from Faith, Hope, and Charity. There were over 150 people served in all over the 6 nights. 72 folks received a warm bed in a hotel, including 9 children. The congregate setting was maxed out at 25 per night each night. And then community partners at the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center moved location to the First Christian Church congregate site in order to have daytime warming available in the absence of the usual daytime warming facilities. 100 people utilized just the daytime warming options. And Faith, Hope, and Charity collects data on each person as they're brought in for services. We had 147 respondents answer some of the survey questions as they come in, and I wanted to share some of these with you all. So out of the 147 folks who responded to the survey, about 40% reported self-reported being medically fragile. 65% reported a mental health diagnosis or concern. 52% reported substance use issues, and 40% reported being connected to either behavioral health or substance use disorder treatment or services. There's another question that I thought was absolutely worth sharing with you all. We had 150 people respond to the question, where did you sleep last night? And out of those 150, 75% said that they slept outside the night before. That's 113 people. 27 or about 20% said they slept in a vehicle of some kind. And 4 people had spent the previous night in the hospital. And then I think it's useful to know, another demographic question that's asked is, where was your last location of housing? About 71% of folks responded. There are 150 responses here. Said Corvallis is where they had last lived in stable housing. About 20% were somewhere elsewhere in Oregon. And about 12 people out of the 150, their last stable housing was outside of Oregon somewhere. So as you've heard from Brian's report and from this information, that's a lot of people served. And it was a strain on providers. And while we had information flowing from Brian to me to various folks, and some information coming back in terms of need, we wanted to ensure that we had an opportunity to have a listening session and hear the experiences of the homeless service community. And so on February 6th, there was a listening session, and we heard mostly that, we heard a few things, and we heard some things that went well, and we heard some needs for improvement. The needs for improvement are peppered throughout what Brian has illustrated here, but we really want to ensure that there's a central point of two-way communications, so that we have those resource requests able to get to the right person, as well as information flowing to the community from a central point of contact, rather than a piecemeal system of information sharing. Absolutely looking at alternates to the daytime warming facilities in the case of closure being necessary. So we are actively working on that. Ideally, having a place where individuals can shelter in place. It's so unsafe to travel during an ice storm. And so if we're able to secure a location where, for example, there are services in the daytime, perhaps a commercial kitchen, that we can, that service providers can safely keep people in one location, that would be best. In terms of sheltering planning, we just want to open doors to ensure that the service provider community is invited to those larger kickoff sessions, as well as our broader community partner agencies. We want to have more sheltering planning, including trauma-informed crisis response type of planning for providers as well. I think Brian's points of improvement help. They encompass the rest of what we're working on. But in terms of the health department, I just want to clarify that we're not planning on standing up a multi-person department operations center for every cold weather activation, because that's happening tonight, by the way. Faith Open Charity is ramping up operations for overflow sheltering tonight and maybe tomorrow night, depending on the forecast tomorrow. But when there are but what we will ensure a point of contact so that anyone with questions can get in touch with the health department. And when there are extended severe weather events, and anytime there is closure of usual available services, then we will absolutely have an open door in terms of teams meeting with a couple briefings a day and regular check-ins to hear and provide information with folks. So that's what I've got from us, and happy to answer any questions that you have.
Questions? So April, what I'm hearing you say is that in terms of standing up health department operations center, the trigger might be whether or not local government services are closed.
That's right. I think regardless of activation of a department operations center, we will ensure that the homeless service provider community is provided a point of contact during an event like today. And when there are extended operations or a closure, we'll have an actual department operations center set up.
Okay. That helps. It's so interesting thinking about different emergency events and how each type of event triggers very different needs. But this one where transportation was largely shut down pointed out a lot of weaknesses in fuel and food and medicine delivery in particular, and staff delivery. And I don't think it's, it might be different in the event of a fire or something else, because at least we'll have transport still. But I think with every one of these events, we learn more and more about where the fragile points are in our systems. And thank you. I really appreciate the very thorough nature of the after action deliberations. And I think that with each event, we are getting a little bit closer to having a system that's robust enough so that people don't fall through the cracks. That said, this last event was a huge strain on so many people, and especially those that are unhoused and those that help care for them. So we can do better.
I don't have a question, but a couple comments. I really appreciate the work that went on during the ice storm, of course, and then afterwards, all of the partners coming together and figuring out the lessons learned. And I think from what I witnessed, everyone was very forthcoming and honest and really was working towards, legitimately doing better next time, as good as we all can as a community, right? So I appreciate that. And then I have a request. April, would it be possible, all those numbers that you mentioned, would it be possible to just put them in a quick little outline and send them to us? Because I just learned better by just reading,
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd be happy to. I asked, so we have epidemiologist interviews today. Hopefully we've got a lot of great candidates. And so I put these on the back of a piece of paper, and I'd be happy to get those in an email or an outline for you.
Thank you.
This is Pat. I had a couple follow-up questions. One that Commissioner Ojero mentioned is at the core of this event was transportation challenges. And I wonder, Brian, have you had any insights on how we could do better?
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner Malone. So the number one thing for at least transportation wise is planning ahead. And there's the community side, right? Where hopefully folks, if they have the means, are able to start thinking about if their vehicles can take chains and having supplies at home. Even if you don't have stuff prepared for 2 weeks of sheltering, which is kind of the ideal minimum, looking ahead at these incidents and possibly, again, if you have the means, going out in advance and getting your supplies, filling your gas tank, being prepared, making sure your generators work, all those kind of things. And again, that's for those with the means and ability to do that. That said, for us on the local government side, one of the bigger things will be making sure we have some fleet resources available for staff and training for staff to be able to drive around. There's still some other, obviously more details that would need to be in place. But even having a couple of vehicles with chains running throughout the day to get medications and other staff around to critical areas would be a huge help. So those are some major takeaways and stuff that we have sort of in the queue right now today as we speak.
Okay, I know the Department of Forestry has a list of resources and contact information, whether it's bulldozers or helicopters or trucks or personnel that is developed and ready to go as needed. And it sounds like we need to do something along those lines so we have a better idea of resources available. My other question is, fire departments and electricity companies do a lot of mutual aid, and where it's just impossible for the local organization to have the resources to handle whatever the event is. And it sounds like we could do better at mean, it's difficult when the whole Willamette Valley is impacted and no one within that area is going to have any spare capacity. But I guess looking outside our areas to bring in, and maybe you've already thought about this and done some of this, but just again, it's a matter of identifying resources ahead of time and contact information and just I know the ambulance service did that. You had that great picture of all of our medical transports up at the hospital, and it was it Albany that filled in around town.
It was, and two interesting things about the mutual aid piece is we actually have some good resource lists, but it didn't take into account vehicle chains. That was not something that was listed and has since been added. And the utility providers actually had crews coming in from all throughout the region, multiple states, contracted and mutual aid support coming in to help restore lines. So they actually did a lot of mobilization around that. And then, of course, Corvallis Fire with their pre-staging, knowing this incident's coming, getting staff lined up. That was kind of a major key piece to this, and something that really hopefully will be mirrored moving forward into future incidents. One thing interesting also about this ICE event is there was some alarming similarities to the initial parts of COVID, where things that we had lined up, there's some things that worked out great and as planned, and other things that just fell through the floor, and we were kind of surprised by it. I think not knowing what vehicles have chains or having people who can drive in those kind of conditions is one of those gaps. We plan for all kinds of things, or winter emergencies with power outages and snow on the ground, but all those are manageable to a certain degree. The ice was a totally different factor. And so that's something now we're taking into account and have sort of retooled some of our planning procedures when it comes to winter storms. And something else we're looking at with our natural hazard mitigation plan that is just recently FEMA approved. So we're now readdressing that as well moving forward.
Well, you mentioned that we got by this time, and appreciate the after event follow up and just trying to figure out where like you said, where we did well and where we need improvement, and no substitute for practice, and appreciate the efforts to get us through the event. And I think this after event planning is critical, so we can do better next time. But thank you and your departments for getting us through.
Last comment regarding April's Department Operations Center piece. Much like the EOC, it is extremely challenging. We'll call it maybe an art form, definitely not a science, to figure out when to activate these sort of things. We can certainly set metrics, but as we're finding out, there's so many other factors that play into this. So we'll be working that and trying to come up with something that we can use as a guiding document or framework for not just Department Operations Center, but also the EOC activations as well. We have done that in the past, but again, this incident once again kind of threw us for a loop. And so we'll get back together and take another look at it.
That does raise a question. In hindsight, would you have stood up an emergency operations center earlier in this event?
I'll say part of me says yes. The only drawback is getting folks to come to a facility that we know, or at least is stable with power, and be willing to stay there for 6+ days, and then providing them with services and support as well. So in hindsight, if we were to face a similar incident, we probably would activate in that manner. If I go back today and redo it, and if we weren't going to activate people in person, I would at least have a slightly more robust virtual activation at the bare minimum. But as we've kind of discussed in some other after action discussions, if internet goes down, if connectivity goes down, we run into different problems, and we do have some redundancies to support it. But again, I think it would be a challenge to provide enough support to even our own EOC staff and then also to the folks out in the field.
Yeah, understood. There are trade-offs in both directions. And with this last event, I think part of the nature that made it challenging was just the basic weather and not knowing from day to day how much longer the event was going to last. So thank you. I really appreciate it. And are there any final questions from? Okay, then we will move on. And I am going to take us through the consent calendar and then take a quick break. So the consent calendar includes two items: approval of the January 2nd, 2024 Tuesday board meeting minutes and application for a distillery permit location. Do I hear a motion?
I move to approve the consent calendar.
Okay, I heard that faint second from Commissioner Malone. Thank you. All in favor, please signify with an aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Now we'll take a 5-minute break. Thank you. See if Commissioner Malone is with us virtually. And we now know that John is still very good at running. Okay, we are heading into item 8.2 under old business. Recommendation for selection of Sustainable Materials Management Plan or SMMP consultant with Darren Nichols, Gabby Dibble from Community Development and Financial Services respectively, and Stephen Chase, the task force chair for the Sustainable Materials Management Planning Task Force.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Thank you very much. We're going to speak in the order that were listed on the agenda. I'll start with some opening comments, then we'll ask Gabby to talk about the process. Then we've invited Steve to provide some contextual comments and maybe a brief look at where we're headed. We're very pleased to present this item to the board and to Benton County and the regional community. Today marks an important milestone, the results of really unprecedented community collaboration on a complex and vexing issue that impacts each of our lives in many ways. What to do with the increasing amount of waste materials in our homes, our economy, and our communities. Through 2022 and into 2023, the board supported a community-driven work group project known as Benton County Talks Trash. That work group and many community members invested thousands of hours in developing a shared history, a common base of information around solid waste and disposal, and eventually a final report with recommendations and findings for the board. During that process, the community work group held dozens of open public meetings and heard from many more dozens of members of the public. That culminated on April 11th, 2023, when the community work group released its final report for public review. It's almost 1,100 pages. You all have read that report, I know. After about a 6-week or 8-week review period, then on June 13th, the board conducted its formal review and accepted that report in a public meeting. Following that, then in June, July, and August of 2023, following one of the key consensus recommendations in the report, the board appointed and charged a special ad hoc committee of community members to develop a draft request for proposal to solicit skilled consultants who could help develop a modern, long-range, regional sustainable materials management plan for Benton County and really for Western Oregon. This additional process step to include public participation and transparency around the development of the request for proposal is, in my experience, above and beyond any typical RFP process. And I want to commend the board for taking that extra step. It was invaluable to Daniel Reddick and to me as staff, and I think has served us very well in terms of getting to a quality RFP. Then, as you recall, on September 5th, the board reviewed a final draft request for proposals and authorized that request be released for solicitation. In response to the RFP, 4 firms or teams timely responded by the November deadline, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Gabby will walk us through that part of the process. At that point, the board also authorized and appointed a chair to lead a regional task force to serve as a community-based, really kind of guidance advisor to the board through the process. Following the release of the RFP, I stepped away from the review process and turned the review over to our finance department. That's partly why Gabby's here this morning. And in keeping with the evaluation process, I have reviewed only the aggregated scores, which you see in your packet. And I think that's a really important point. We relied on our professional team, and I especially want to say thanks to Gabby and the procurements team this morning for helping the county navigate both our own rules and also state rules, and importantly, protecting the integrity of the RFP process. So following Gabby's description of the process, steps, and the recommended action that's before you today, I've also asked Steve Chase, your appointed task force chair, to provide some contextual remarks on the path forward. Many contributors are part of this context, both within Benton County and also throughout Western Oregon. And after hearing from you about the recommended action, the local and regional parties involved, as well as our momentum towards solution making for all of Western Oregon, I hope to return to you on March 19th with a charter and timeline for the project for 2024 and beyond, at least through the end of this calendar year. So in closing, I just want to emphasize that your comments and direction have been vital in leading this process, and they continue to be very welcome on this journey in the making. Thank you.
You had it on. Yes. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Thank you, Darren. Good morning, board and everyone in attendance.
You may need to put it a little closer to you though, Gabby. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's try this again. Thank you, Darren. Good morning, board and everyone in attendance today. Before I get into the SMMP RFP timeline, I would like to briefly go over the county's typical RFP process as described in our Benton County Code Chapter 2. RFPs are to be publicly advertised. The RFP materials for respondents is made available the same day as the advertisement. Respondents review the materials within the RFP and craft their responses for submission by the deadline. Any questions received from potential respondents to the county regarding this RFP are compiled in a Q&A document to be added to the RFP documents for all to reference. This ensures that all proposers have access to the same information when creating their responses. Once all timely responses have been received and the deadline is closed, responses are opened, evaluated, and scored based on the criteria outlined in the RFP by an evaluation committee, which is selected by the project manager or department conducting the procurement. If needed, the county may ask for clarifying information regarding responses and may conduct interviews with some or all of the proposers to help further evaluate which proposal and firm would best fit the needs of the RFP. Once an award has been determined by the evaluation team, a notice of intent to award letter is sent to the participants announcing the award of the contract. At this point, a 14-day period begins in which protests or appeals can be submitted to the department conducting the procurement. Once the protest period is completed with no findings, a contract can be fully executed and work may begin on the subject project. At no point before the award can any proposals or contents within be made public by the evaluation team. Once an award has been made, RFP responses and scoring are available to the public for review unless otherwise noted as confidential by the proposers. This RFP process was far from our standard procedures and required careful navigation on the part of the procurement officer. From the beginning, this was a large collaborative effort. The SMMP RFP itself contains contributions from the Benton County Talks Trash Group, the SMMP Task Force, formerly known as the Ad Hoc Committee, is made up of a multitude of agencies, organizations, businesses, and individuals from all around the Western Oregon region. In addition to these unique qualities, much of this process was made public, including the Q&A session in which the public was able to submit questions to proposers directly. To summarize this, the RFP process has been unprecedented. I will now give a timeline of this process to date. On September 13, 2023, Benton County released the SMMP RFP. Responses to this RFP were due no later than November 8, 2023. Community Development opted to hand this process over to one of the county procurement officers, myself, to ensure this RFP would be completed as objectively and legitimately as possible. The county received 4 timely responses from 4 separate firms. While not required, the county elected to record the opening of these proposals and publicly announce the names of the responding firms. See update 11/14/23 on the SMMP RFP site. On November 22nd, 2023, the county announced that a virtual public Q&A session would be held with all 4 firms in which the public could submit questions. These sessions were conducted and recorded on November 28th, 2023. See update 12/1/23 on the SMMP RFP website. On November 29th, 2023, the county conducted interviews with each firm. This was also done publicly on a virtual platform and recorded. See update 12/1/23 on the SMMP RFP website. Following the interviews, the evaluation committee appointed by Daniel Reddick, former solid waste coordinator for community development, completed their scoring independently and submitted their scores and notes to the procurement officer to aggregate. The scoring and evaluation committee included the following individuals: Daniel Reddick, solid waste coordinator, Benton County; Gabrielle Dibble, myself, Contracts and Procurement Analyst, Benton County. Sean McGuire, Sustainability Coordinator, Benton County. Sarah Siddiqui, EDI Coordinator, Benton County. Matt Gillespie, Policy Analyst, Health Administration, Benton County. John Dool, former OSU Recycling Coordinator, appointed by OSU to be a liaison to the BOC in regards to the SMMP. And Shannon Bush, Community Development Coordinator, Benton County. I would like to sincerely thank each scoring committee member for their participation. Once scores had been aggregated and a top scoring proposer was identified, the corresponding proposal was submitted to the SMMP Task Force Chair, Steve Chase, who is not involved in the scoring, but is still considered part of the evaluation team and therefore able to view the proposals submitted. Before Steve was able to view any proposals or scoring, he was required to sign a confidentiality and conflict of interest form. Steve was provided the aggregate scores of all 4 proposers in the top scoring proposal to review. His role was to determine if the top scoring proposer's offerings would be supportive of the development of the SMMP in conjunction with the county and task force. Steve requested to view the top 2 scoring proposals before making any recommendation. Following these reviews by the task force chair was a period of time spanning a couple months in which the SMMP task force was refined and prepared for work to begin with the successful firm once the award was made. Throughout this entire process, only the scoring team has had access to view all 4 proposals. The task force chair was only able to view the top 2 scoring proposals. No other individuals inside or outside of Benton County have been allowed to view the proposals in any capacity. This concludes my summarization of the SMMP RFP process to date, and I will now hand it over to Steve Chase, our task force committee chair. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, members. 35 years ago, there was quite a movement that was afoot. At the time, our entire nation was engaged in remediating old landfills that were unlined, closing burn dumps, oil field waste disposal facilities, et cetera. But it was also quite an uplifting period of time. While we had talked about recycling and reuse and the establishment of markets, we hadn't done much since the 1970s. 35 years ago, we rolled out curbside recycling across this nation. We asked our public to put food waste in compost bins in the backyard. We asked our public to put green waste into green waste bins and to separate and toss recyclable materials. We also spawned a number of recycling markets that use these materials, if you will, as raw materials. Much of the aggregate that goes into our road base today includes recyclable materials. I'll use that as one example. Much of the public parks equipment, play equipment, uses recyclable materials, et cetera. So looking back, it was a real positive time, but it was a time that may have made it too easy. We have, over the last 35 years, we've separated, we've tossed, but we've also looked away. What we haven't done is establish source reduction at the top end of the integrated waste management scale. And at the bottom end, we haven't really gotten to a point of a robust recycling market economy. So looking forward now to where we are today, what we have is tired facilities, tired infrastructure, be it a transit station, be it an ill-sited material recycling facility, be it a landfill, such as the one in our backyard. Replacement is very difficult throughout our nation, let alone in Western Oregon. We have dwindling capacities within a number of these facilities. And of course, we have a different brand of pollution. So as we have cleaned up old burn dumps, remediated sites for oil field waste disposal, et cetera, we have essentially the emissions from landfills, the emissions from waste energy facilities, the trucking involved, et cetera. So into this mix today, and as it relates to the recommended action, one of the things we don't have in Western Oregon is a baseline of facilities existing, planned, and by planned, I mean thought of, and then those that are proposed that are actually in either a pre-permit or in a permit cycle itself. We don't have that roadmap. We have a sketchy understanding, and this isn't just Benton County, but throughout Western Oregon and a number of the players with other counties. We have a sketchy understanding of who's doing what, who's thinking about what in terms of facility replacement or facility improvements. So we need a baseline for all of Western Oregon, quite frankly. And that's a first step. The recommended action today of bringing a consultant on board will eventually deliver us that roadmap. It'll look at what is existing, what is planned, what is proposed. And at a very high level, it'll also look at the environmental footprint of those particular facility desires. There's a second step, though, that's afoot right now, and that is the creation of a task force, if you will, a regional forum. There really is a thirst with other counties, with the state as well, with nonprofit individuals that are involved in the recycling industry as well as for-profit to address the facilities, address the infrastructure, to address emerging technology, to take a look at marketing opportunities out there, to create a robust economy for these raw materials, to tie them into our economic development, our economic vitality plans that all communities have in terms of business startup, job creation, et cetera. And once and for all, to really look at source reduction beyond recycling, beyond landfilling, beyond waste to energy, and beyond all of the trucking that occurs to support those facilities. Benton County has chosen to convene this task force. You have asked me to chair this task force. It has drawn widespread interest. And as Darren pointed out, it's unprecedented interest. The parties are asking that we continue in our endeavors to have a task force that is regional oriented, all inclusive for Western Oregon as a whole. It has gained quite a bit of momentum. There's quite a bit of demand for our time to come meet and essentially advertise these desires, to promote a task force, to preserve Benton County's role as a convener in it. As Darren pointed out on the 19th of this month, we hope to come back with a task force charter, organizational structure, a list of real deliverables for 2024, and then the timing beyond that. I do have a final comment, and I think it's an important comment to make. The work of the task force, ultimately, because it's regional, because it's all inclusive, because it's urgent, it should be transformative. It should lead to legislative action and rulemaking that benefits all of Western Oregon. It should present an opportunity to plan our future rather than to have it handed to us by out-of-state corporate America. It should capture leverage in our negotiations of franchise agreements with the various haulers out there. It should connect these raw materials to our economic development platforms. It should, quite frankly, be an enduring table for regional discussion and united actions. The very last thing that I wanted to comment on, I wanted to respond to one of the speakers earlier this morning in terms of my environmental chops. I come out of the University of California, Santa Barbara Environmental Studies program. We were the second graduating class in that particular program. I'm part of a founding team member of the County of Santa Barbara Office of Environmental Quality. We wrote those dreaded environmental impact reports. We worked with the federal government on those dreaded environmental impact statements, dreaded by industry, dreaded by those that wanted to sprawl. I worked with the County of Ventura for many, many years as part of the Environmental Resources Agency and actively led the transformation of industry such that we closed industrial facilities on our beaches and facilities that were ill-sited within our valuable wetlands and riverbanks. I worked with the Board of Supervisors of the County of Ventura for a number of years also, and was the executive officer of the Ojai Valley Municipal Advisory Council. Everything in Ojai has an environmental connection. I was the City of Ventura, California's very first environmental coordinator. I ran the recycling office. I was one of those parties 35 years ago that implemented much of the curbside recycling systems. I don't want to take credit for it. All of this work was done as part of teams. I then went on to work with the County of Santa Barbara as its energy czar. What is that? It's the manager of the energy division. We were the parties that were the top regulators from the edge of 23 offshore oil and gas platforms to the subsea pipelines, to the onshore processing facilities, and then to the transport facilities, including marine barges and pipelines out of the area. I then went on to form and bring about with the City Council of Goleta their clean air plan and adopted an environmentally oriented new comprehensive plan. Finally, my work with the City of Stockton was twofold. I came out of retirement and was invited to be a key expert in the federal bankruptcy proceedings at federal court. It was at the time the largest municipal bankruptcy in our nation. While doing that work, I was able to help shape their clean air plan, and I was able to reorient their comprehensive plan, which in part was responsible for sending them into bankruptcy because it was a sprawl plan into a growth within the city center core area. In terms of my organ chops, who am I? My mother grew up in Woodburn. My mother also went to school in Mount Angel. After my father passed away, my mother came to live in Beaverton. I spent most of my summers here in the Willamette Valley. My wife and I, a dream came true. Upon my first retirement, there have been several, we came here nearly 5 years ago as a resident of the unincorporated area. Yes, I'm still a newbie, even after the 4.5 to 5 years we've been here. I acknowledge that, but I am an old hand when it comes to environmental resource management. And I do so, I believe, with a set of table manners. It's all inclusive out there. I think the very last thing I want to say is I'm also just a guy that checked a box that came via the email. Would you like to volunteer? Yes, I would like to volunteer. And I would encourage others to do it. If not for the county, then do it for the private nonprofits that are out there. Do it for the cities. It is an invaluable experience. I believe I have the environmental chops. I believe I have the temperament and personality. I believe I have the organ chops to help lead this task force that you, the county, have initiated. That'll complete my remarks. And like others here, we're open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you all for setting the context and for explaining the process for the RFP and how we did go above and beyond our typical contracting process. So now queuing up the decision before the board.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. And thank you for indulging the extra walk through the details. What we're asking you to do today is under the authority given to the county in Benton County Code Chapter 2.390, titled Notice of Intent to Award. Staff is recommending that the board authorize staff to issue a notice of intent to award a contract under the RFP that was released back in September, and then proceed with negotiating a revised scope of work and contract with the top scoring proposer. My understanding is once we have your authorization to proceed with the notice of intent to award, then the proposals can then be made public, but are required to remain confidential until that point.
Thank you. Fellow commissioners, questions? I am not hearing any questions. Any discussion? Oh, Commissioner Malone.
Yeah, I just, Darren just mentioned walking through the details, and I appreciate that. I'm was modestly aware of this process going on, but I didn't know a lot of the details and how thoroughly the process was, and I think that's important to make it clear how we're getting to where we are now and what the plan is for the future. But I'll thank all three panel members there for kind of setting the table and making it clear how we got to where we are today. So thank you.
I guess I'll just add my thanks as well. Thank you to Gabby for your good work and for the evaluation committee. Thank you for taking the time to present this to the community. I think that's very helpful. And Stephen, thank you for your willingness to volunteer. I know you've been trying to volunteer since last July and you're still here, so thank you. And I'm happy to make a motion if.
Please.
I move to authorize staff to issue a notice of intent to award a contract under the Sustainable Materials Management Plan RFP and direct staff to begin negotiating with the top scoring proposer to develop a revised final scope of work and contract consistent with the RFP and Benton County Code Chapter 2.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please signify with an aye.
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 Aye. Thank you very much. Okay, that concludes our old business, and we have one item under other, which we will take up now, and then we'll take a little break before our public hearing at time certain at 11 a.m. So the item under other is a request from the ABC House, which is our Children's Advocacy Center for Lynn and Benton counties, for a contribution towards their annual fundraiser. It's a table sponsorship. This year, it costs $750. The price has gone up by $50 from last year because of change in venue. So we have supported ABC House for several years, at least the past 8 by my count, as a key community-based organization providing for the care of children that have been sexually abused and their families. And we have before us a question of whether to sponsor it for this year. We have plenty of funds in the budget. We've only spent 300 of our community-based organization support budget so far this biennium. So any discussion?
Just that I'm happy to support.
I feel the same way.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion. Is there a motion for support?
Authorize $750 to support ABC's house's annual fundraiser.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, please signify with an aye.
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 Okay.
So I do have one request, which is, so this is purchasing a table, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I would like us to have a conversation. I would like all of us to have a conversation about who is going to be at that table. Because I understand recently, in my opinion, there was some, I feel like the Celebrate Corvallis decision was not handled in the best of way. I don't remember getting the opportunity to bring a guest for me as a commissioner. So I just would like the opportunity in this case to have a conversation about it, all three of us.
Absolutely.
And I'm sorry, I did have one other thing, which is just, I just wanted to put out there that I'm happy to meet with any constituents, chat, talk, please send me an email. We can set up, coffee or a phone call or whatever people would like. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, at this point, we have 20 minutes until our public hearing announced time. So we will again be on break until 11 a.m. It is now 11 a.m. and our recording is back in progress. And we will now turn to our public hearing in the matter of second public hearing regarding Community Development Block Grant Rental and Housing COVID-19 Emergency Project. And we have today with us Rick Krager and our consultant, Rachel, to address the closure of this CDBG grant.
Thank you, Chair Ojero, members of the board. Pleasure to be here today to talk about the Community Development Block Grant, which is excited to announce our third grant that we had gotten. As you might all recall, during the COVID, there were 3 different grants that were provided to the county, the first being our child care assistance, the second being our food assistance, and now the final, our housing. And so we are at the point of closing out a grant. And as part of that process, we are required to read into the public record in accordance to federal rules, the actual announcement. So before we begin into a small presentation on the results, we'd like to read the public announcements, and Rachel will do that. And then Amanda will be joining us to read that in Spanish.
Thank you.
Good morning, commissioners. And I would also like to note that we have Nicole from Dev Northwest, who's a partner in this project. She's online and here to speak about and answer any questions once we get into the presentation. A quick note, in the public hearing notice, there are 2 corrections that need to be made in the first paragraph. It is Benton and Lynn counties, and it's not 140 persons, but it is 132 families, which, as we know, is more than 140 people. So this is the second public hearing notice for the CDBG Rental and Housing Grant. Benton County is completing a rental and housing COVID-19 emergency project with Community Development Block Grant funds from the Oregon Business Development Department. The location of the project was in Benton and Lynn counties. It is estimated the project has benefited at least 132 families, of whom 100% are low or moderate income. A public hearing will be held by the county on March 5th, 2024 at 4500 Southwest Research Way, Corvallis, Oregon, 97333. This meeting can be accessed remotely via Zoom link. The purpose of the hearing is for Benton County to obtain citizens' views about the project and to take comments about the local government's performance. Written comments are also welcome and must be received by March 5th, 2024 at 9 a.m. PST at 4500 Southwest Research Way, Corvallis, Oregon, 97333. Both oral and written comments will be reviewed by the county. The location of the hearing is accessible to the disabled. Please contact Lindsay Goodman at lindsay.goodman@bentoncounty.gov if you need special accommodations to attend or participate in the hearing. More information about the Oregon Community Development Block Grant Program and the project is available for public review at 4500 Southwest Research Way, Corvallis, Oregon, 97333 during regular business hours. Advance notice is requested.
Aviso de segunda audiencia pública, CDBG, alquiler y vivienda. El Condado de Benton está completando un proyecto de emergencia de alquiler y vivienda por COVID-19 con fondos del programa de subvenciones en bloque para el desarrollo de la comunidad, Community Development Block Grant Program, del Departamento de Desarrollo de Negocios de Oregon, Business Development Department. El lugar del proyecto fue los condados de Benton y Lynn. Se calcula que el proyecto benefició al menos a 132 familias, de las que el 100% son de ingresos bajos o moderados. El condado hará una audiencia pública el 5 de marzo de 2024 en 4500 Suroeste Research Way, Corvallis, Oregon, 97333. Se puede acceder a la reunión de forma remota a través del siguiente enlace de Zoom dado. El propósito de la audiencia es que el condado de Benton obtenga las opiniones de los ciudadanos sobre el proyecto y reciba comentarios sobre el desempeño del gobierno local. Los comentarios escritos también son bienvenidos y deben recibirse antes del 5 de marzo de 2024 a las 9 de la mañana, hora estándar del Pacífico, de 2024 en 4500 Suroeste Research Way, Corvallis, Oregon, 97333. El condado revisará los comentarios orales y escritos. El lugar de la audiencia es accesible Para personas discapacitadas, informe a Lindsay Benton si necesita alguna adaptación especial para asistir o participar en la audiencia. Puede encontrar más información sobre el programa de subvenciones en bloque para el desarrollo de la comunidad de Oregon y el proyecto para revisión pública en 4500 Suroeste Research Way, Corvallis, Oregon, 97333, durante el horario de atención habitual. Se solicita aviso previo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Rachel, for the reading of the public notice. And now, Commissioner Ogerow, referencing you to pages 35 of your packet, we're going to just do a quick presentation in terms of the results of the Community Development Block Grant, and primarily turning this over to Rachel and I think Nicole to provide some information. But again, just before kicking off, I want to just recognize Rachel. She's been a great partner with me, especially since starting here at the county and working through the 3 different grants. And she's been the lead grant administrator dealing with all the nuts and bolts that come with community development block grants. So I just want to share my appreciation for her. We've been able to spend out over $1 million over the last 2.5 years. That has gone to some really, really great purposes. So happy to share results of the housing assistance grant today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rachel.
Thank you, Rick. Rick is also my favorite CFO to work with ever. So, and I would note that for those in the audience who are not necessarily familiar with CDBG, we have to read out the public notice as it is stated in English and Spanish as part of the HUD rules and regulations. It's just one of those fun administrative burdens for CDBG. But I would also note before we get into this presentation that CDBG does remain a good funding source for different projects, including community facilities, which can go towards homeless shelters, lots of other senior centers and other uses as well. The next round of CDBG is going to be opening up in July. So if the county is interested in pursuing any of those projects, now would be the time to start planning for that. So for this project, we'll go to the next slide, please. So the total award was $485,000, and we spent out, I think, all but 25 of those dollars, which is great. 400,000 of that went directly to rental, mortgage, and utility funds, and $50,000 was for Dev Northwest to do program coordination, and $35,000 was for administration for my firm to help with reporting and liaising and all the other fun administrative things. Next slide, please. So there were 132 families served in Benton and Lynn counties. And you might be wondering why Lynn County is up there. Well, initially Dev Northwest was challenged to spend out all of the funds within the time period that we had. And given that their service territory extends to Lynn County and there was need there, we thought it might make sense to extend that. And so Business Oregon was able to do that. But the primary number of families, the majority number of families were still in Benton County. So there was 110 families in Benton County and 22 families in Lynn County. And you'll see the race and ethnicity breakdown down below. And then I think, was there one more slide? Was that it? Okay. So that's the breakdown of the rental, mortgage, and utility assistance. And again, this is for people who were, facing eviction or couldn't pay their bills. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Nicole to have her talk a little bit about the impact directly on the families that they serve.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, commissioners. Thanks, Rick. This program was incredibly impactful for many of the folks that applied, especially who were facing eviction. We had many families coming to us who were several months past due and really facing eviction, maybe already in court. And we were able to get these dollars out the door quickly to them, get the money to their landlords, and prevent those evictions. And in a few cases, foreclosure as well. Folks were facing foreclosure. And we were able to get the money to their mortgage company quickly. Again, with utilities, we had folks with shut-off notices. We were able to prevent those shut-offs of utilities for many families with these dollars. So thank you all very much. This was really, really impactful for these families.
And Nicole had mentioned to me earlier as well that a lot of the families were elderly heads of households as well. and that this funding came at a time when a lot of other COVID emergency funding had kind of gone away at that point in time. So it was a great project, and Dev Northwest was a great partner. They were very helpful in terms of reporting and everything else. So
Thank you. So now we will enter the public, unless there are questions from my fellow commissioners to the presenters, we will enter into the public comment period. Okay, is there anyone who wishes to make public comment on the use of our CDBG dollars for rental assistance and mortgage assistance, et cetera? No one had signed up in advance, and I don't believe there's anyone online to comment. So with that, I will close the public hearing, and we will move on to deliberations. Is there any discussion? I would like to just thank you, Rachel, and Rural Prosperity Partners for bringing to us all of these opportunities for community development block grant funds in the depths of the COVID-19 response. We had not been applying for CDBG for a long time because it's an onerous HUD process, but the assistance from you and your team got us back into the game. And as Rick said, that meant that we were able to put more than $1 million out into the community at a time when they were much, much needed. So thanks again for that. We will be looking hard at future CDBG opportunities, weighing them against the workload and the benefit to community. But now we know that it is possible to do it without too much pain. So I see that Commissioner Malone has his hand raised.
Yeah, I had a question, I think mainly for Rachel, talking about the future and next round opening up in July. Would the program be similar to what we've done in the past, or is this a new out of the COVID times approach?
yes, Commissioner Malone, this was a one-time program during COVID. Unfortunately, it will not be continuing, but community development block grant programs, other programs are available, such as community facilities. And then there are a couple of others that I can't think of off the top of my head, but I would be happy to provide a summary of those to the Board of Commissioners.
Well, it sounds like we need to have a discussion if we're going to be in the CDBG game, or if this was just a one-time effort on our behalf. But I think it'd be worthwhile to have a discussion of pluses and minuses of continuing on this path. So thank you.
We will make sure that we get that on a future agenda. And I concur, it's a worthwhile discussion. Part of the challenge is geographic location limitations for some of the funding. But we should have that discussion. Okay, I will entertain a motion to approve the report as presented.
I move to approve the report as presented.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify with an aye.
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 Aye. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, with that, our regular business is concluded, and we are now going to recess our regular session and move into executive session under ORS 192.6602D for labor negotiations.